first time on the show.
Great to see you, Steve. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so just lay out for us what the issues are that are involved here from a legal and constitutional law perspective and how you see them.
Absolutely, and I think it's really critical at the outset to point out that these two articles of impeachment are so flimsy. They have absolutely no basis in the Constitution. They are being brought forward by the Democrats simply because they're trying to save face and they're trying to impeach Donald Trump just because they're running out of time. We saw that they've been trying to do that since the Mueller investigation for 2.5 years. They thought they would get obstruction of justice. They thought they would get this Russia collusion narrative, and because that absolutely fell flat, now they're running out of time. And so these two articles are probably the most vague, overbroad, and weakest arguments that they could possibly present. And a lot of pundits have been talking about obstruction of justice. I want to point out it's actually obstruction of Congress that they're voting on. And so obstruction of Congress is the Democrats' way of actually ignoring the separation of powers. Every American president has exercised legitimate executive privilege and due process rights. And if there is a dispute as to the application and scope of those privileges and due process rights for the executive branch, then when there's a dispute between Congress and the executive, the two political branches, we can go then to our non-political branch, the judiciary, to make sure that they render an opinion. And so that's not obstruction, that's making sure that Congress doesn't overreach, and neither does the executive. But the Democrats don't have time for that. They're saying you're obstructing Congress because you're not willing to simply let us overreach and let you impeach you for absolutely no legal or constitutional basis. And then for...
Yeah, no, actually, can we just stop on that one before we get to the other one? That's incredibly interesting. You've made such a powerful case there. Basically, it's worse than flimsy. It's like the obstruction of Congress thing, if I'm hearing you right, is kind of non-existent as a legal argument because the executive is perfectly entitled under the Constitution to not cooperate with anything that the legislative branch wants to do. And in that situation, the referee is the judiciary, and they haven't ruled yet on this. Is that the point you're making?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why we have a separation of powers, so that Congress can't overreach even in their oversight authority. And so when we have the two political branches that have to work in tandem but have very separate vested constitutional powers within their separate but co-equal branches, the referee, as you rightly pointed out, is the judicial branch. And yet we're seeing that Congress under the Democrats in the House are not allowing for due process. They're not allowing for the judicial branch to actually make those rulings and determinations. That's not obstruction of Congress on President Trump's part whatsoever. If that were true, then every single American president could have been impeached on that basis, and that would give Congress basically overbroad authority to do whatever they want.
Incredibly well put and powerfully argued. Let's just bring Lisa and Sarah back in. I mean, Sarah, when you hear that from Jenna, it's embarrassing that they've even gone ahead with that obstruction of Congress one. We'll get to the other one in a second, but just on obstruction of Congress, it seems like that just is non-existent as a case.
Oh, absolutely. It is non-existent as a case. But remember, what they've done here is they've weaponized the impeachment process, right? This is just about taking out a duly elected president, somebody that they don't want in office. And that's why the American people are seeing right through this, Steve. That's why we don't see the polls shifting. They realize there's absolutely no evidence of any crime whatsoever, and that this is very partisan. And we haven't seen this in the past. Remember, when the House votes, it's an issue that all the American people are watching. This is something that they say, well, this is just so completely one-sided. From the moment that they started investigating President Trump over 3 years ago until this very moment, we can see that. So it's evident, it's obvious. Jenna's right.
So Jenna, I think you were going to get into the other article, the abuse of power one. I'd love you to do that and then get Lisa's reaction after you've laid out the issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So abuse of power is the other one that, again, this is just such a vague term because when we look at the Constitution, it's a specific set of limited powers that are vested in each of our branches of government. And so to exercise those powers, that's public policy. And so it's not whether or not the president can act in a certain way. That's the constitutional question. If that question is yes, how exactly he exercises that power is the reason we have elections. That's the reason that the American people voted for Donald Trump, is because they wanted him to have that specific power. So for the Democrats to claim abuse of power is literally going against the very idea of our constitutional republic, to say that we don't want this president to set foreign policy. When you heard all of those so-called witnesses who didn't even really witness anything firsthand, all they were doing was disagreeing with President Trump's foreign policy and with his completely legitimate vested power to withhold aid temporarily to make sure that it goes along with his administration's preferences for national security interests, and to make sure that it doesn't run afoul of anti-corruption. That's perfectly within his purview. So to claim abuse of power is literally just saying, we don't like your policy. That's why we have politics in this country. That's why we have elections. But we heard Jerry Nadler say from the very beginning, we can't wait until 2020 to get rid of this president. He doesn't like President Trump's policy. The Democrats just want to get rid of him. That is not a substantial legal or constitutional basis for impeachment.
Again, very powerfully put. Lisa, what do you make of that?
I know, thanks a lot. I got to go after that. But this is, I mean, that's the point that, Jonathan Turley was making during this snooze fest hearing that we were all forced to watch and wasted hours of our lives sitting through a law class that none of us signed up for or wanted to have to listen to. But that was the point he was making.
I did, Lisa, unfortunately.
I know, we all wasted, hours of our lives, right? But a lot of better things we could have been doing. But that was the point that Jonathan Turley was making, and saying, look, if you make a high crime and a misdemeanor out of going to the courts, that's your abuse of power. And he was saying this to Congress. You're the ones that are abusing your power. And again, I think time after time, we see Democrats having conducted themselves in a way that they accuse President Trump of doing. And I mean, you can go back to even on the Ukraine issue, and you look at someone like Alexander Chalupa, right? And she's working with the Ukrainian embassy to dig up dirt on Paul Manafort. So, or even on Russia, you've got Hillary Clinton and the DNC paying for information from Christopher Steele, which potentially was Russian disinformation. So again, time after time, we see Democrats having done the very things that they accuse President Trump of doing.
There you go. Well, listen, the great points all round. Thank you so much. Jenna, by the way, I can see that the president must be very happy to have you in his corner in this legal and constitutional fight. Great to see you this evening.
Thank you. It's very much a privilege to represent him, and look forward to defending the country. And it's great when the president is also on the side of the truth and the Constitution. It's a great time to be a constitutional lawyer, and especially to defend President Trump.
All right, there you go. Thanks very much. Coming up, why don't the